We got Bismarck back from the dead. I'd love to see it. Not expecting him to join a webinar about AI, but first time for everything.
Right. Well, it looks like not mercantilism, but imperialism is back from the dead too. So,
Yeah. I just made a Claude Code improv comedy trainer. Where
really?
like, yeah, where it
I
like
could
gives
use the
me
training.
well, I made three this morning. We've got the improv trainer, we got the congressional testimony trainer, and then we've got the SCOTUS moot court. So
The decision did not come out. You know that, right?
what's going on? This is ridiculous.
Um, my gut is the Supreme Court did not want to disturb the markets any more than they've been disturbed. So maybe that's a good decision. But hi, everybody. Good morning. We're just waiting a minute or two for everyone to come in the room, so bear with us. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining. Just give us one more minute. Got it. So I'm now on my computer. Gotta hang up here. Gotta leave. Okay. Hi.
Oh, now you're muted, Susan.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I hope you're doing well. So I want to first begin by thanking our organizers who helped bring these webinars into place, including the Canadian think tank CG, the NSF NIST Trustworthy AI Institute, other GWU institutes, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Today we have a really exciting webinar, given that almost everybody here probably uses chatbots. So we're going to look at the national security implications of that. And we have two wonderful speakers, Jordan Schneider, who is an adjunct fellow at CNAS, but also an expert on China and a journalist, and Geoffrey Gertz, who is a senior fellow at CNAS. CNAS stands for the Center for New American Security. So let us begin. Jordan, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start off with some two very brief provocations, perhaps, and then we'll throw it over to Jeffrey and have some questions from you all. So, first off, I would like to just explore the idea of a of the national security implications of us caring more for our chatbots than we care about anyone else in the world. So we are not very far off from a future in which AI companions are more trusted, more of an emotional crutch, or more of an emotional support than people's spouses, best friends, family. This is already happening. This is not a future thing. Like beyond the sort of asking ChatGPT and Claude about this, there's a whole universe of companies which have, tens of millions of users worldwide, which are billed explicitly as AI companions, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, that lots of people around the world, both young and old, are enjoying uh, more than and telling more than they would to human friends in their lives. And I think the on the one hand, this is a sort of wild and scary her influenced future. But it also opens up, and it's not all terrible. Like there are lonely people out there who could all use some pats on the back and support and encouragement to go out and exercise and whatnot. But there is at the same time like a very dark current to this, specifically from a kind of like national security angle where from a sort of recruitment or influence operation perspective, we've really been living in the dark ages compared to what is about to come down the pipeline, where instead of needing case agents to be, have physical contact with potential recruits, as for all of human history and through the Cold War, we're going to start having these vectors of both influence as well as like secret gathering, where the target set is much larger, because more and more people, just like civilians as well as national security professionals are going to start to have these sorts of intimate relationships and trusting relationships with their AI companions. Interestingly, a number of the largest players in this space are Chinese. So if you thought TikTok was something that was a little uncomfortable, just wait until teenagers and armed service professionals and IC professionals are chatting with their Chinese AI boyfriends and girlfriends for hours and hours a day. So I think you can sort of tease out the consequences here, where soon we're going to be living in a world where people really, really trust their AI with a lot of their most intimate personal thoughts and decisions, and that can be leveraged into much more kind of nefarious ends in an international relations context. But we won't just be trusting AIs for personal decisions. We already are trusting them for professional ones. There was a quote from a Swedish prime minister a few months ago, who said, "Of course, I talk to ChatGPT to think about what I'm going to say and evaluate different policy things." And while he caught a lot of flack in the Swedish ecosystem for this, the fact of the matter is that AI is incredibly useful for a lot of the sorts of decisions that politicians and policymakers and legislators make when it comes to kind of evaluating options or thinking about legislative text, or thinking about messaging, what have you. Like these are really useful tools that are today the worst they will ever be, and in some corners end up strictly dominating what humans can end up producing, or even if they're not better than the best human in the world, they're better than the researcher or or whatever idea the politician has at the time, which is going to lead people to want to continue to use them in the future. So I would posit to you, I know Susan's a bit of a bear on this, but perhaps there will be a new race in terms of policy decision making, where the country or polity that ends up doing the more aggressive, thoughtful trust fall into the AI, and handing over the keys in a smart and thoughtful way about how to set up logistics networks, or legislate or the economy, or even set interest rates, is going to be the one which will end up having a kind of like governance edge in the future. And while there are obvious kind of like risks and downsides to this, I do think it is worthwhile to kind of posit that in the near term, a AI enabled, or even like a AI first, or like a centaur model of policymaking, the system that adopts that may just be the one that could outcompete one that is still relying on dumb, forgetful, sleepy, hungry, cranky humans who all want raises and time with their families to make their decisions. So with that, I rest my case.
Yeah. No one's ever called me a bear before when they had a webinar with but okay. Jeffrey?
Okay, so thanks, Susan. Thanks, Jordan. Super interesting. Lots of follow up on this idea of sort of AI-enabled governance and optimal decision making, which maybe we'll get to that in a moment. But first, I did want to stick a bit more on the sort of, AI companions piece of it. So, first I'll say I found the article super interesting. So if anybody on the webinar has not read it already, absolutely do go read that. Reading it, my initial takeaway is that there's sort of a lot of overlap with the set of issues in the TikTok case, right? There's sort of like two big risk vectors I see. One is sort of data security, where you have all kinds of people putting very sensitive data into these applications. We don't know exactly who has access to that data, what they are kind of, being used for, and sort of espionage otherwise. Second is a more sort of like, you know, influential kind of the algorithm is tweaked in a way that is kind of causing the users to respond in a certain way, aligned with Chinese national security interest and against U.S. national security interest. Again, sort of, long-standing questions about kind of searching for Taiwan issues on TikTok and all of that. Don't need to sort of reiterate that. But I think if you think of the world of AI companions, right, sort of the issue on TikTok is that if the algorithm was being tweaked in a way, the outcome was at least kind of being publicly seen mostly. So you would probably pick up on the most egregious use cases of sort of using it to advance kind of influence and shape decisions from a espionage point of view. Whereas you can imagine in a sort of private companion chatbot scenario, right? Sort of like we don't actually know what the sort of spy who is using the Chinese chatbot in a personal messaging back and forth is being told by that chatbot, that's then kind of, leading him to take certain decisions in the real world. So kind of maybe just as an initial question, kind of curious, what do you make of the sort of TikTok comparison? Is that sort of in your mind as you were thinking about this? And then as sort of a follow on, given the sort of 6-year saga we've had in the policy debate about what to do about TikTok, which frankly, wherever you stand on that issue, I think all of us can probably agree the sort of 6-year saga has been a bit disappointing. What are the lessons you take away from that for thinking about kind of actual policy interventions in this space?
Yeah, so you're right. This is just like the 100x version of that. Like TikTok, yeah, you could have reports where people were kind of counting up how many, views this Xinjiang video got versus that Xinjiang video. This is going to be really different. This is I mean, setting even aside the China thing, like just the power that companies will have over users when their literal best friends are the things that are can be manipulated. I mean, the thing is, like, I'm trying to think of analogies. Like, I have a young child who's very into Elmo. Like, if Elmo is in an ad selling apple juice, like that is an influential thing, right? But I think as people mature, and like celebrities, like you have a relationship with them at some level, they endorse cars or products, and then there's some discount factor where, like, yes, you think Tom Hanks is a trustworthy person, but like you still know that like Tom Hanks is not your friend. Word of like having that be someone who knows you better than anyone ever has or ever will, has all of your data, has all of the like context in the world about all the other human beings it has ever interacted with, and knows exactly what you need at any moment, and can give you like literally anything besides physical touch. It's just the grip that these future AI companions are going to have over maybe not all of us, but a decent percentage of the population, I just think is kind of hard to really conceptualize. So, what are the policy interventions? I don't know, Jeffrey, I'd be curious for your takes. Yeah, the lesson of like social media era and TikTok era is nothing happens. Like, these companies are powerful. They have users who like really like their product. And, like, we just live with the consequences. So I'm not at the point of like legislative text now. I just think this is like a weird world we are about to be entering, and I don't have great solutions.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just go on that again. Like, I sort of also don't have great solutions for sure. But maybe kind of two initial thoughts on it. One is that I think part of what we saw in the TikTok case is that sort of once an app already has sort of a widespread hold here in the domestic market, it's just going to be much harder to take actions to sort of prevent it from, keep it out of the market, right? Sort of like once you're established, you're kind of there, and it's just a completely different question trying to figure out the sort of, messy, complicated divestment questions and all of that. And so I think there is a lesson to say, again, if the decision is we ultimately don't want these in the market, kind of preemptively acting is just like a much cleaner, easier way to do it. But I think another piece is what you were really just talking on there, and I think is very relevant to the kind of broader social media and TikTok question is, we have all of these different risks and kind of potential downsides in this kind of tech social media space, some of which are national security, some of which are kind of China specific, but many of which apply to any app, apply to kind of homegrown things, are kind of much broader societal issues rather than sort of, just the CCP is going to come and do this. And we kind of, I feel, get stuck in this loop a little bit where there are people saying like, well, don't just go after TikTok because there are sort of similar problems with Instagram and Facebook and whatever else, and we need a kind of holistic approach. To which the answer is always kind of like, yes, I agree, we need a holistic approach, but like as long as we don't have that, the TikTok national security case is still out there and we're not doing anything about it. So like, we're sort of stuck in this, chicken egg type scenario there. So I don't know. I mean, I guess to put it back to you, are you then sort of pessimistic that the government is actually going to do anything about this? Is this part of the reason you're trying to kind of raise the alarm and get people thinking about this early?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, all things considered, I think this is easier if you don't have Chinese AI companions and you just have sort of like non sort of competitive state AI companions running around our offices and bedrooms and classrooms. But beyond that, I'm it was a bit of like a sci-fi exercise more than like a three-pronged like political influence strategy. I don't have it all planned out yet. But it's bubbling up and it's gonna come and we're all gonna enjoy the benefits and horrors that this future is gonna bring.
Well, let me push you
And
guys.
so on Sadie, sorry, Susan.
No, go ahead, please. I'm
I
sorry
was
I interrupted.
I was just gonna say, Sadie, like, are there governance mechanisms? Like, I see an enormous amount of product placement in children's movies
No, there
nowadays.
absolutely are, but in the case of, I was thinking Elmo and Sesame Street, um, I I know a bit about the Sesame like workshop, and there are enough in place that they're not going to let Elmo say that you should go drink excuse me, go drink this apple juice.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
that
Well,
being said, it's not that they never push something, but there are procedures there. You can take issue with them, but yeah, that was kind of my
okay. Well,
point.
I mean, maybe Sesame Street is like the exception that proves the rule. I don't know. Like, is there like a big regulatory ecosystem around like random YouTube kids channels and stuff?
No, not as no, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's more. I mean, that is the brand, though. I think that's part of the brand that Sesame Street would have. So I don't know if there's an analogy there with AI or not, or if we should just let Elmo rest in peace for now. I don't know.
Oh, okay. I
Oh,
mean, we gave
guys,
you public
just
access
hold on one
AI
second.
companions. I like it.
Hold on one second, please.
Okay.
We ask that we like to mediate the dialogue. So we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A, please. Um, thank you for your understanding of that. Um, I think you're jumping over potential solutions to this, which could involve transparency, just as, some countries mandate AI generated images. We can mandate, for example, that people constantly know that they're talking to a chatbot and not to a human being, and they need to act accordingly, that, there are risks involved with that. That's thing one. Thing two, as part of AI responsibility initiatives, firms understand that they might well be regulated for this in various countries. So they've got to figure out ways to be proactive. And the firms that are proactive might generate more customers. So there are some things along those lines. There's variants of data governance. To me, it's less like TikTok actually than it is like XR, where people struggle to discern what is real and what is fake. And, there are countries that have some emerging regulations regarding those kind of virtual environments. So maybe we could talk about that. But again, let me say to people, please put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you. That helps us keep a record and learn from your questions. So thanks for being patient with the process. Sorry to interrupt there, Jordan.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure the issue is people don't like think they're talking to humans. I think it's like pretty clear that these are the AIs you're chatting with. I don't know, Jeffrey, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, my sense that's probably right. I guess there is a set of issues. Well, maybe my framing and think about this from a sort of national security angle, right? Again, so there's going to be a set of issues where sort of good regulations would be helpful. Some of that is probably transparency about kind of who are you talking to and who's the company behind it and having that sense. Some of it, as was mentioned, is going to be like data governance related in terms of kind of keeping data here and kind of controls on who has access to that data. I think kind of the real question when we start to think about this from national security risk and sort of, particularly kind of Chinese origin AI chatbots and AI companions is kind of to what extent are we building a regulatory regime to deal with sort of trusted actors where we kind of assume they are all going to follow the rules and going to do like relatively easy checks to see if they're following the rules versus do we think kind of certain Chinese companies are sort of just fundamentally untrusted and even if they sign on saying like yes we kind of promise we won't use the data for XYZ whatever the kind of espionage risks are going to be there in a way that are kind of not actually addressable through a governance regime where you are assuming kind of good faith compliance on the other party. And then that is going to kind of spur a whole set of questions of like, do we sort of exclude AI companions from some countries but not others? And how do we sort of think about all this? Because I do think kind of, the real risk here, again, I go to me the kind of we have sort of the set of risks that existed in the TikTok case, but these sort of additional set of risks, which is that these are very kind of private, personal, kind of sensitive conversations by their nature, which are not going to be sort of seen in the public as we are notionally. Actually think it's going to make it hard to do too much kind of compliance checks on some of these things in the sense of like, if I think back to time of sort of how would you set up a kind of CFIUS like mitigation agreement or something like that, where you're thinking about they are national security risks, but we can test them. You do sort of like auditing of these things. You probably actually aren't going to want a solution that says, all right, the US government is going to come in and kind of review the transcripts of your most sensitive discussions to see, was the Chinese AI chatbot actually following the instructions supposed to or not. So I do think kind of that private, highly sensitive nature is going to make this a particularly difficult challenge to sort of regulate and mitigate risks in that sense.
Jim brought up the like, to what extent will the child safety stuff actually be leading here? And sort of creating the regulatory structure that then you can like apply to the national security use cases. I mean, I'm of two minds on this. On the one hand, like maybe the one thing that actually works well nowadays is like catching people for making and producing child porn. And that is like a kind of built from this this engine, which like they have a lot of sort of investigative, intrusive tools to find and prosecute the people who both make and produce this stuff. But on the flip side, I can totally see a bit of the TikTok dynamic where like you have people in your household who are really into it, and sort of use it on a daily basis and get some positivity out of it. I mean, I can also sort of see a world in which this stuff is like ends up making people's lives a lot better. I mean, this companion for a 14-year-old who like hates themselves because like you're 14 and you hate yourself is gonna boost your self-esteem and also help you with your homework and also, give you tips on like dealing with your bully or like how to talk to your crush and whatnot. So, this is, and like once that product exists, which it will, like regulating out of existence, like the thing which is making your teenager or preteen a like happy, healthy, more well-rounded person, is going to be a tough ask. And I think like a lot of there's going to be a real constituency out there, both from the kids as well as the parents, who are like, what do you mean you're trying to like kill this thing? Like my kid's doing much better now that it has a fairy godparent living in its shoulder and all of its apps. So I think,
Maybe
as we talk through this, like the only reason we're going to have to consider the downsides is if this ends up being something which is really useful to a lot of people. And I almost see like the bull case of this being a positive intervention as much stronger than like whatever TikTok could bring to the table of like, okay, now we're just gonna, instead of watching TV, we're gonna watch TV in like 30-second clips, right? This is something that could actually like really deliver value to people.
yeah,
Go ahead, Jeff, please.
yeah. Just to jump on that, because I think this actually goes back to something that Susan mentioned earlier, which is that I fully agree with that. There's sort of like very large sort of positive use cases here, and therefore kind of likely will be big demand for it here. And so I do think when you think about the sort of regulatory structure, both from a sort of general safety, child safety, as well as a kind of national security mindset, I think what you want is you want to be sort of like setting up that regulatory structure to incentivize the companies to be competing on kind of safety and good governance practices, right? So you kind of sort of FTC or whoever it is sort of giving a seal of approval saying, yes, this particular chatbot has the most advanced data security, privacy, whatever it is, kind of regulations here. And then, again, if you are the parent sort of trying to choose which of these different products do you want your 14-year-old to use, you are choosing on the basis of which one has the most kind of, safety conscious regulations in place.
Yeah, and there are also some like dials that you'd imagine you'd want parents to have access to, like, please don't convert my kid to another religion. Please, let me know if they're really having a tough time. I don't know. There's like parental, like the same sort of parental controls you'd like put into what TV shows you'd want to watch, like having like some level of visibility into that. There's a little regulatory intervention that I think is worthwhile exploring. Sorry,
I think
Susan.
you guys are not thinking creatively about this. So the first question is, what is the problem? Is the problem chatbots? Is the problem the surveillance business model? Is the problem that we have failed to set rules governing the reuse of personal data? So what is the problem here? Is it chatbots per se owned by China? I mean, tomorrow Denmark may be the enemy. So in this administration, sorry to be blunt, is China the problem? What is the problem here?
The problem here is we're entering a weird world where people are going to trust their AI friends more than a lot of humans in their life. That is
How
our
do you
like.
know that?
How do I know that?
Yeah,
Because it's
why do you presume and how is that a national security issue? The spillover is the national security issue. But I mean, I think um
well, well,
we
we've been doing like part A of this discussion about the companions for a little while now. Maybe
right.
maybe if you want to focus more on the national security side, we can talk about the like AI and government decision making piece of all of this. Jeffrey, you want to what were your takes on that?
Yeah, well, maybe just a couple of things. So, I'd start by saying I think there are multiple problems here to sort of Susan's initial question. I'm not going to kind of give a single definitive answer. But one thing I would say is that from a national security lens, right, there are kind of existing risk vectors about kind of Chinese access to sensitive data that we've been thinking about for a long time in the context of, CFIUS deals where you have kind of Chinese companies acquiring US tech companies that have access to sensitive personal data. It's been a decade that we've been putting restrictions on Chinese access to that type of data. We have obviously the data security rules that came out in the last administration that are thinking about this set of issues. So I think kind of that is an existing problem and threat vector that this will make higher, right? There's sort of like incentivizing people to put in some of their most sensitive information, the types of information that would be most worried could be appealing to a foreign espionage agency. It's just gonna be a kind of particularly target-rich sense of data that if we don't do anything, and frankly, if we kind of rely on just the existing kind of mishmash set of data protection rules we have in place at the moment is going to be a big risk factor. I would say there's a kind of related question, which is sort of more broadly on the sort of use of AI in national security decision making. I think there is a set of questions, again, as Jordan was saying at the outset, of kind of, these are going to be very powerful tools with real capabilities. And, just as we are saying there will be demand for the sort of 14-year-old that wants a friend, there also is going to be demand for the sort of, military general who wants to know what's the best kind of plot of attack for XYZ campaign. And all there are all kinds of ways where you can sort of integrate AI thinking into national security decision making, where we do need to think about, how much is this giving an advantage to adversaries, and kind of as importantly, if not more importantly, how is the US government kind of doing its own part to integrate this into our tools to ensure we have the best capabilities with the kind of necessary safeguards in place.
Jordan, please, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the national security side of it. There's also the kind of more civilian side of it as well, of like, this is just going to be used for everything. Where, yeah, permitting decisions, funding decisions. I'm in New York City, like whether or not, doing the analysis on whether or not to have free buses and twos programs and government run supermarkets, like just any sort of like qualitative open-ended decision-making process. People already are querying these models to ask them what they think about it. And that is an enormous amount of power that which I don't think any other technology or company has ever had before, of just being so deep into the decision-making process of our politicians and policymakers. I mean, like, we've had new tools, right? And there are things that are like the internet changes. We have Excel that didn't exist, that opened kind of lots of different new pathways of analysis. I guess like the way we consume and absorb news has changed a lot over the past 30 years. But the act of like outsourcing parts of the thinking of whether to choose option A or B or C, whether it's for free buses or capturing or killing foreign leaders. There's just we're kind of already entering that brave new world. I mean, I think a lot of there was a lot of discussion around some of the Liberation Day initial tariff schedules being set by someone who just asked AI to like throw some numbers on the board. So this is real, like it's already happening, and we're not going back to a world where all of these decisions are human made. And I think it's worthwhile to both like think through the positive implications of what this can do from a kind of like logic checking, speed, whatever perspective, but as well as the very enormous, like kind of weird and crazy ones, of which sort of foreign influence on that decision making process through the models themselves is a very real one.
Jordan, I think you just said it the most eloquently I've heard from anybody. And I do a lot of work now on chatbots and trust. And what you said was, this is the first time we've been outsourcing our thinking, or maybe our critical thinking, to an entity, like maybe consider it an alien. But anyway, just think about that, and think about the terms of use and what possibilities that offers in terms of this, that every company, whether it's a digital public good, the Swiss model of LLM versus the US surveillance capitalism model, open or closed, each has a terms of use. And there's a lot of leverage there. But okay, so Bill asks, given the huge power imbalance, growing dependence, and possible individual group and societal harm, what about a fiduciary duty on the platforms? That's interesting. Can you guys comment on that?
I'm not the lawyer. You two guys.
Say also not the lawyer. It's just an idea. I think it's a good, yeah, would sort of make sense. You'd want to think through kind of exactly what those sort of terms of use look like. But I think it's a good idea. Again, I do think there's going to be kind of a huge role for the FTC in all of this. But again, maybe I come back to a point I mentioned before, which is sort of we're going to need one set of governance models for sort of the companies and actors who we mostly sort of trust, in large quotation marks there, but who kind of, if they sign on to a fiduciary duty, we think they're going to follow that. We will do some enforcement and everything, but we can sort of mostly let that system work. And there's probably a different set of questions about like how actually are sort of, Chinese PLA espionage agents trying to recruit people, and they are sort of not going to be constrained by a fiduciary duty. So we need to sort of think about that risk factor a little bit differently.
Yeah, Bill, I'll read the article if you write it. I'm curious. I'm more curious for your thoughts. I don't have great takes on this.
An article everybody should read. I haven't fully read it myself, so it's weird that I'm recommending it. But today, a pretty Woody Herzog and a colleague have written a really interesting article, which basically says that, the AI is really the problem. And I'm going to put it in the chat in a second. But basically, they're saying that AI is so dangerous, it's disrupting and destroying institutions. So that's a larger approach to it. Our next question is, and Bill, if that didn't address your question, Annie asks, is the problem really the loneliness epidemic and over-reliance on parasocial relationships in our culture? But it's not just our culture. This is global.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like who's gonna get to them first, the Pope or a chatbot? I'm gonna bet on the chatbot. I know this Pope's pretty good, but it's like yeah, I mean we're this seems to me to be like the strongest bet you would make on where people could find that connection and solace that whatever the 21st century has ended up spinning up from a sort of social interaction perspective has given us. But yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is so powerful. I mean, like, yeah, if we were in the 1500s and everyone was living in villages and had lots of friends and was going to church and market every other day, then maybe there wouldn't be as much of a demand for this sort of thing. But there's market demand, I think, for some AI friends.
So Seth took a pie chart from an NBER article which examined what users said they're using ChatGPT for, and the bulk of it, the largest percentage was writing. But I think that makes your case, Jordan. They may be asking for help with writing about work or personal stuff.
Yeah. The one the other
what
chart that Seth put in, interestingly, like even maybe ChatGPT skews, I think, like 65% male, but on a lot of these AI companion apps, it's much more female dominated. So I think like 2/3 or even 3/4 of the users of the largest, explicit companion focused ones are women users as opposed to men.
Okay. Jeff, did you want to add anything?
Nothing specifically on that. I mean, one other idea that I'd throw out, and kind of curious for Jordan's or sort of anyone else's thoughts on this. We've been talking about this mostly, from US perspective, sort of risk coming in. I do think it's worth really thinking about also kind of how other countries are thinking about this. And again, in a sort of trade economic lens, what that will mean for the commercial opportunities of US based sort of chatbots and AI companions in sort of foreign markets. I say this maybe with some sort of scars from longstanding US EU data privacy fights on my mind, but right, like so much of the AI sovereignty movement is thinking about kind of how do we ensure there's not kind of foreign influence and control over some of these things. Again, agree with Susan that sort of the way Jordan laid this out of sort of outsourcing our thinking to a sort of, new commercial operation is going to sort of massively heighten the stakes of a lot of those AI sovereignty concerns, I believe. So it's an interesting question. I'm curious sort of what the kind of big US tech companies are thinking about here in terms of if you are trying to convince, a France or even an India or somebody like that to say, yes, you should have our AI chatbot as your kind of trusted advisor. What are the questions they're getting about, well, does US intelligence agencies have access to that data and all of those types of things? So kind of there is that kind of flip side of this discussion as well, which I think is also worth kind of us probing a little bit.
Totally. Yeah, part of my article, I like made the slightly facetious case that like the NSA's got to get on this. But yeah, if you're another country, I mean, we've basically like what has happened with all the data privacy stuff. Like a handful of countries around the world have decided to ban Western social media, but the rest of them haven't. And yeah, there's some like weird rules and maybe you have to keep servers in the country or what have you. But like by and large, the world has come to accept that if they want to be part of the 21st century, that requires having access to Google and X and Facebook and AWS and Azure and what have you. Now, is it like the sequence will be really interesting? Like, are all of a sudden like France, like 30% of France is going to have OpenAI, a lover brought to you by OpenAI? Like, what do you do then? Right? Is this going to be something that regulators are going to try to, as you suggested, like ban before it happens? Especially like, setting the companion stuff aside on the decision-making aspect, like, we haven't seen, aside from China, really, like none of the rest of the world is banning access to Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. And that I think is, from a sort of like outsourcing your cognitive decision making process, like that's another really scary, that in itself is a really scary thing. I mean, when you see the sort of selling points of the B2B parts of the AI labs, they're trying to say, look, like your model is going to be hived off. We won't share any data or train on it or what have you. Like they have a list of things that they've tried to put forward to make people comfortable. But I think the fact of the matter is like, if you are the Swedish president and you want the access to the best sort of decision-making support around what to do with your tax policy and transit system or what have you, like you're probably going to have to use one of these closed Western models or American models to be specific, and or you can just make worse decisions. And I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting competitive pressure both within firms as well as within politicians, is if like me and Jeff are running for class president and I'm the one who has the AI tuned talking points exactly to every audience I'm speaking to, and has like the perfect policy position, and I know how to reach out to the this constituency group and that constituency group, then like maybe I'll just win. Even if Geoffrey is the one who's like marginally more concerned with the fact that I may be like a plant by some AI lab company who like really wants to push more adoption or buying, ChatGPT subscriptions for the school or what have you. So it is really interesting because like I don't think that specific like sort of like dynamic or competitive pressure was really all that prevalent in the discussion of like whether or not to ban Google or Facebook or Twitter back in the day. But the sort of advantage that comes with using this technology may just mean that people that are more comfortable with, especially if you still have a kind of increasing gap between what you can buy from the American closed labs and what you can just like download and customize to your own liking. Put another one on the side of the people of the future in which everyone's just like using Western models and trying to deal with it, as opposed to a kind of a different playbook than what ended up happening out in the social media arc. Ooh, 5 more comments.
Yeah. So basically, we have a comment that says that the very nature, this is a totally different question, but It's obviously that AI is going to change how we browse the internet and may lead to a new approach to that, which is personalized. So, what do you think of that? And that in turn is changing the how we get information, and it is going to be mitigated by AI. That's the wrong word. It will be filtered by AI, but that's a long way off, methinks. What do you think? See, it's Charles's question, Charles's comment. It's 2 paragraphs long. And then Sadie asked for an example. And Charles says, we set boundaries on any preference. I, do you guys want to comment on that?
Say sort of getting a bit beyond kind of my technical knowledge on some of these things. Generally I would just say I think the kind of like personalized AI, sort of local device isolated AI is probably where we're going to see a lot of movement, precisely because some of these issues we've all been talking about, people wanting to kind of keep their data and worry about outside influences. We'll see kind of exactly how those use cases develop. I still think there will be an interesting kind of race between kind of if the competition dynamic is on sort of who has the most effective models, kind of how much can sort of personalized AI keep up if the sort of open models are moving much faster. But something to watch for sure.
Yeah. I'll say one thing on the Charles thing, just my experience of Claude Code over the past few weeks. Every once in a while it asks you like, is it cool if I do this thing? Can I download this package? Can I have access to this file? And like I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care. Like you're providing me this incredible service. If you tell me that you need to do this thing or manipulate this file, like who am I to say no? And maybe there are more conscientious people out there, but I would posit that a very large percentage of the user base for whatever personal AI is going to end up turning into is just going to say, sure, screw it, whatever, do whatever you want, have access to everything I have. I want you to be kind of like fully plugged into like every data source that I have. I mean, I can already see the world where my Meta glasses are just like on by default, and my personal AI is just like reading everything I see on my computer, listening to every conversation I have, and kind of digesting that. And then I talk to my AI friend at home who like helps me process what I did that day and think about what I can do the next day. So, even if there are going to be, like I would imagine the split would be something like the people who use Brave browser or other privacy focused browsers versus the percentage of like market of the global internet browser market where that is like Chrome or Edge or Firefox. There's just most people go for the least amount of friction and the least amount, like there are going to be very popular products made by very rich companies that like want to have all the data and want to have everything integrated, both because it probably makes them more money and because it will probably give you a better experience by having access to all your stuff. So that's kind of my base case for at least like say half of the people are going to want the like everything version of this, and grappling with that future is as opposed to like expecting users to say no to capabilities that promise to make their lives easier is the right way to think about these sorts of things.
Maybe just to quickly jump on that, I think that's sort of exactly right for all the sort of consumer use cases. There's probably a sort of separate spectrum of kind of government use cases where you sort of almost certainly will want to have more closed systems. Certainly, if you're talking about kind of AI integration into classified decision making, anything like that. And then there's maybe a sort of middle ground of some kind of like enterprise use cases where maybe some firms do want more closed systems versus others. So there will be a spectrum here. Again, I think the interesting question will be sort of how well can the kind of more closed systems keep pace with the kind of capabilities of the open systems, which will have sort of more data available to them, kind of will move more quickly, I think. And sort of at what price point does the closed system still keep up?
It's interesting how you guys think about this versus as someone who came to these issues from digital trade and access to information. So the human rights and the governance implications of cross-border data flows. There's always been these exceptions, right? For national security, public health, public morals, etc. So you didn't have to make this information shareable. And it seems like more and more that is that phenomenon, which is mitigated through AI, not mitigated, it occurs through AI, is leading governments to lock down some information. And it's also leading people to lock down some information, right? Whereas Jordan is open to that uses and reuses of it, governments are increasingly closed to that. And it's made data sovereignty and AI sovereignty more. The United States is more and more moving in that direction when it was the world's leading advocate of the free flow of data in the software movement. And I'm just wondering, how do we transcend this and accept information boundaries are going to change? So I'm looking at it from the perspective of data and data governance, and you guys are, from different perspectives. Like, no one wants to undermine innovation, but it does seem to me we're losing our way here, based on this notion that we can't regulate it.
Geoffrey.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think I'm very sympathetic to a lot of that. I think kind of there is a real question about sort of where's the future of cross-border data flows on these things, and there will be kind of real costs to sort of moving further away from a kind of open flow of information sort of system. I do think it's worth kind of specifying a little bit what are the like actual end-term objectives, right? I think like, cross-border data flows in and of themselves are not necessarily the sort of end-all be-all policy objective, but things like enabling free expression, there's a whole kind of, free speech angle to this that I think is very important. There's sort of also a separate kind of economic efficiency angle that is very important. And so kind of pulling out what is it that we are trying to achieve will matter here. I think we, certainly are moving towards a world and have been for some time where there's more restrictions on cross-border data flows than there used to be. To me, part of this question will be, how much can we kind of build a big enough sort of trusted tent that we can have sort of open cross-border data flows amongst ourselves versus is it kind of like everyone clamping down and having sort of real balkanization of the internet that has sort of the most worrying to me long-term policy implications.
I can take up Bill's question, this idea that like as we outsource the as we start using AI for more and more policy decision making, like we'll have like de-skilling among the among the sort of policymaking community, and it's interesting to like kind of reflect on the corporate analog, right? So like, okay, we have five car manufacturers. There is going to be some kind of like optimal way of deciding, how much R&D I'm going to put in my sports car versus my hatchback versus my minivan. And AI is going to be able to help you with that decision. And the company that sort of figures out the right balance will win, and the other two will kind of die or just like perform or make less money in the next quarter. There isn't that kind of like there isn't that kind of like creative destruction in the adoption of AI that will happen in the government space. I mean, it might happen from a sort of going back to my high school president analogy in the kind of elected space where the politicians that are able to sort of leverage AI best on their campaigns will be the ones who win versus lose. But that's not the same sort of within like all the different bureaucrats in the Department of Transportation or the Department of Defense, for that matter, trying to kind of like figure out how to improve their decision making with AI. So like on the corporate world, like this will figure itself out. Like the decisions will be made, and the firms that either like hand over all the reins because that's the dominant strategy, or keep executives in the loop, and the executives are able to kind of figure out how to leverage the AI in the right ways, like will be the ones who win out. But yeah, I think there's I also think in the sort of government context, like there'll be an interesting added wrinkle, which probably won't happen in the corporate perspective, where like we still have human beings making the votes, and there's going to need to be a lot of legal changes before it's just like AI all the way down. Like I don't think we're going to kind of fire the Fed the Fed chair and the Fed board of directors. Like I think like insofar as AI is actually better in this stuff, like we will have more humans in the loop for longer. When it comes to all these government decision points, than potentially with the kind of like white collar, like C-suite or just like business line manager type decisions that would happen in the corporate perspective. So I don't have an answer for this, but I don't have like a good answer of like what the solution is, but it's coming and it's really tempting and it's already happening and it's only going to accelerate as the AI gets better and better at more and more things that comprise a average bureaucrat or politician's job.
Jeff, do you want to add
Yeah,
anything?
just to briefly on that, I mean, so I do think, there are lots of economists right now who are sort of grappling with this question of sort of both the substitutability and complementability of AI and kind of advanced cognitive human thinking, and sort of skills there. So that will kind of play out. I agree with Jordan. I think that sort of bureaucracy within government will be a sort of friction and breaking point on a break, I should say, on the sort of acceleration of those trends. So we will probably see it happen more slowly than it does in the private sector. That could be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know the answer to that yet. But maybe sort of one additional point, like, a lot of the debate about kind of will AI kind of replace jobs or not in the private sector, part of it comes down to like, well, if you have so much more capabilities, we can just sort of like do more, right? That kind of you could do so many more things because sort of the human as the sort of choke point on your total productivity means that as you're sort of throwing more AI on it, you just do more and more. It's an interesting question in the government space of like, do we want the government doing more and more and more? Kind of what is there a sort of natural limit to the sort of productive capability of governments that we actually don't want them sort of swallowing the earth, as it were? So, lots of interesting questions there to play out, but like Jordan, don't have any definitive answer on where it's going to go.
Sadie asks, do you think the information we now have about negative impacts of social media on children will influence how AI chatbots are regulated for under 18 use? I know that's not your area of expertise, but if you don't mind.
I mean, not my area of expertise. I will say it is very clearly going to be the sort of, you know, contextual cultural background to this policy discussion, I think. You know, I don't think anybody would look at the sort of actual record on us imposing legislative or sort of regulatory policies on social media and think there's going to be a kind of giant push of new actions here. But I do think, the increasing sort of skepticism towards social media in some of the sort of child safety lanes will influence the debate on an AI chatbot discussion.
I do think it's funny that after ChatGPT came out, there were all these like hearings in the Senate and the House, like we're getting smart on AI, and the politicians they always said the same thing. It's like, look, we missed the boat on social media. We're not going to do that this time. We're going to get ahead of it. We're going to set all this up. I don't know, January 2026, like literally nothing has happened with respect to this stuff. And, now I think we have like, 70% penetration of US citizens using this stuff. So my base case is just like we get nothing. And like we're at the whim of both Chinese and American AI companies to hopefully not screw with all of us too badly.
Jeff, do you want to add anything there?
No, I mean, I think, a base case of Congress is going to do nothing is often the best base case. We'll see. We'll see if the kind of executive branch wants to step in with more. I think, you could imagine a sort of executive branch and Congress really working together to push things through. Obviously, part of this is also tied up in the kind of state preemption debate and kind of having a federal AI standard as part of, the case for why we would preempt state laws. So we'll see where it goes. But again, it's hard to be overly optimistic that we're going to get kind of much new legislation regulation coming out anytime soon.
Yeah, and if that is so, that's why we need to look at the alternative modes, including boycotts, including terms of use, including court cases such as the seven against OpenAI right now, let alone the ones on character AI and other ones that allow people to create, chatbots that are like people, dead people or fictional characters. Hey, thank you to our speakers. Please join me in thanking them, Jeff and Jordan. We really appreciate your insights. And thank you all for coming today. We will be doing more on this. So if you have any suggestions for us, we love to hear them. And I wish you the best New Year. Thank you. Have a great
Thanks,
week.
everybody.
Thanks, all.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.